Hello and welcome to Annie's Short Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Sinister Toyshop. Holly Arnold could feel something unsettling the moment she stepped into Carrington's toy shop. The shop stood on a shadowed corner of the Isle of Wight, with its Victorian facade looming over the quiet street. Its exterior was chipped and weather-beaten, the colours long faded. The sign, Carrington's, had lost some letters over the years, now reading car and G-tons, but the eerie charm of the place had never diminished. Holly was a writer who often sought inspiration in unusual places, and Carrington seemed like the perfect spot to find a story. Her research had led her to rumours about Mr. Carrington, the shop's owner, a man rumoured to craft unique dolls and clockwork animals, each more lifelike than the last. But the whispers also hinted at something darker, that the toys in the shop weren't quite as innocent as they appeared. She stepped inside, and the air grew thick and stale, smelling faintly of old wood and something unidentifiable, like metal dust. And was that wax? Shelves lined with dolls, plush animals, tin soldiers, and marionettes stared at her, their glass eyes gleaming in the dim light. She shivered but pushed her discomfort aside, moving deeper into the store. The toy shop's owner, Mr. Carrington, appeared from behind the counter. His face was gaunt, eyes set deep under wiry brows, and his thin, bony fingers seemed to tremble as he greeted her. "Welcome, Miss Arnold." "Looking for a toy, that perhaps I'm actually a writer," Holly said. "I've heard about your craftsmanship, Mr. Carrington, and was curious about your work," he chuckled. "Craftsmanship, yes, some might call it that." Holly's eyes drifted to a doll nearby. It was dressed in a faded wedding gown, its porcelain face cracked but still beautiful. The doll's eyes, bright and unblinking, seemed almost aware. She felt herself being drawn to it. "Interesting doll," she said. Mr. Carrington's expression darkened. "That's Lillian. Quite the story behind her, though I don't think you'd care to hear it." "Oh, I'd love to," Holly replied. She had a knack for sensing when there was a story to be found, and Mr. Carrington's hesitation only intrigued her more. He sighed, glancing around the store as if to ensure they were alone. "Well, very well. Lillian was once a bride to be, wronged and betrayed by the man she loved. She took her own life in despair, and some say her spirit remains restless, seeking revenge on those who betray her. I crafted that doll in her likeness, you see. But Lillian, well, she's one of the more, shall we say, the unforgiving toys in my collection." The last word seemed to hang in the air. Holly swallowed, her throat dry. There was something sinister in the way he spoke about the doll, as though it truly possessed some lingering fragment of the tragic woman it represented. "Eh?" Holly asked, half joking, but her voice wavered. "More than haunted. All of them are. They hold pieces of the ones they resemble, and in some cases their souls. These toys, well, they don't just sit idly by." She forced herself to keep asking questions, despite the uneasy feeling gnawing at her insides. "Why do they stay?" she asked. Mr. Carrington's gaze fixed on her. "Because they have unfinished business. Each toy here represents someone wronged, betrayed, or hurt, and they wait for a chance to set things right. They know who hurt them, and they bide their time, waiting for those who deserve their wrath to find their way here." Holly's heart raced. "And what if someone else, someone innocent, wanders in?" "That's a risk one takes when one steps into Carrington's. Sometimes they grow impatient, sometimes they take matters into their own hands." As he spoke, her gaze drifted to a marionette dangling from the ceiling, a grotesque caricature of a jester with a leering grin and hollow eyes that seemed to bore into her. She could almost feel its anger, its barely contained fury waiting to lash out. Just then, the faintest whisper seemed to come from somewhere in the store, a hushed, childlike giggle followed by a metallic scrape. Holly's breath hitched. She turned, scanning the shelves, but there was no one else in the shop. Did you hear that?" she whispered. He merely shrugged. "The toys are restless today. Perhaps they sent someone. The familiar?" Holly asked, confused. "I haven't wronged anyone here. It's best you leave, Miss Arnold. The toys are not kind to strangers." Once night falls, Holly knew she should go. She reached for the doll in the wedding dress, her fingers brushing its cold porcelain surface. Suddenly, its eyes seemed to flash with a malevolent glint, and she could have sworn it whispered, "Why did you betray me?" Holly recoiled, heart hammering. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she'd heard. It couldn't have been real, could it? Before she could pull her hand away, the doll's tiny fingers closed around her own, locking her in an unyielding grip. Panic flooded her as she struggled, but the doll's grip was unrelenting, stronger than any lifeless object had a right to be. The other toys began to stir, their eyes flickering to life. The tin soldiers stepped down from their shelves, marching stiffly toward her, their bayonets glinting menacingly. The marionette just swung down, its strings pulling taut as it dangled directly in front of her, its wooden mouth opening wide as if in a silent scream. Holly thrashed, desperate to free herself from the doll's grasp, but its fingers dug deeper into her skin, holding her in place. She could feel its icy grip spreading through her hand, numbing her arm as though draining the life from her. Mr. Carrington stood by, watching impassively. You see, Holly, the toys here do not forget, they do not forgive, they are relentless in their pursuit of justice. She could hear whispers now, voices from long-forgotten souls demanding retribution, chanting for vengeance. The weight of their grievances pressed down on her, suffocating, as though the very air in the shop had thickened with their hatred. In her final moments of clarity, Holly glimpsed her own reflection in the cracked glass of a nearby display case. But it wasn't her face staring back, it was the face of a porcelain doll, its eyes dark, hollow, and unfeeling. And then silence. The next day, Carrington's toy shop opened as usual, with a new doll on the shelf, a young woman with striking features, clutching a notepad and quill. Her eyes were fixed in a perpetual look of horror, her mouth open as if mid-scream. She sat beside Lillian, the betrayed bride, and the two dolls' glassy eyes seemed to gleam in sinister harmony, waiting for the next customer who dared to disturb their endless vigil. Days turned into weeks, but Holly Arnold's disappearance barely registered on the Isle of Wight. People assumed she'd left on another one of her research trips, perhaps chasing down an unusual story as she so often did. Only her closest friends knew the truth, that Holly had vanished, leaving no trace behind. Meanwhile, Carrington's toy shop continued its quiet, eerie business. Mr. Carrington himself remained as aloof as ever, showing only the faintest hints of a grin whenever a new customer entered. He'd carefully placed Holly's doll on a prime shelf near the entrance, where it seemed to peer into the souls of anyone who dared linger too long. The locals whispered more and more about the toy shop and its unsettling contents. Stories grew of strange occurrences. Patrons would feel something brush against their skin, hear faint whispers, or even catch glimpses of movement from the corner of their eye. A few even claimed to hear a young woman scream, echoing softly from the walls late at night. One evening, a young couple named Tom and Emily ventured into the shop, drawn by curiosity and a touch of defiance. They'd heard the rumors about Carrington's, but dismissed them as town gossip. They were, after all, ghost story enthusiasts, and what better place to test their courage than a shop with such a creepy reputation? As they entered, the air grew heavy and still. Mr. Carrington greeted them with his usual grim politeness, his eyes gleaming as he watched them wander the aisles. Emily's eyes quickly settled on Holly's doll. She took a step closer, her fingers reaching out as if pulled by some unseen force. "Look at this one, Tom. It looks so real." "Yeah, it does, almost like it's watching us." Emily gave a nervous laugh. "Don't be ridiculous. It's just a doll." But as her fingers grazed the doll's porcelain cheek, Emily gasped and pulled back, clutching her hand. Tom asked, a hint of concern creeping into his voice. I'm not sure. It felt like—" Emily shivered, glancing uneasily at the doll, which now seemed to be staring directly at her, its glassy eyes alight with a strange intensity. Mr. Carrington's voice cut through the silence. "Some dolls hold more memories than others. This one, for instance, was modeled after a young writer who has a knack for finding stories in dark places." "You mean?" Tom asked. "Oh, very much so. But she had a way of getting too close to things she didn't understand. Some might say she got what was coming to her." Emily's face paled, and she took a step back. But as they turned to go, something strange happened. The shop seemed to close in on them, the shadows thickening as the toys came to life, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. Tiny hands reached out, grasping at their clothes and limbs, their movements eerie and silent. "If Tom lets go," Emily whispered. But it was too late. The dolls and toys had surrounded them, blocking their way. Tin soldiers raised their miniature bayonets, forming a barricade. The marionette jester swung down from the ceiling, dangling in front of them, its hollow eyes fixed in a mocking stare. Emily screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the shop's unnatural silence. Tom tried to push through, but a pair of cold porcelain hands gripped his ankle, rooting him in place. From behind the counter, Mr. Carrington watched with a quiet, almost reverent satisfaction. "You see," he murmured, "those who enter Carrington's toy shop never truly leave. They become part of the collection." As Tom and Emily struggled, Holly's doll seemed to watch. For just a moment, a flash of recognition glimmered in its eyes, a brief, tragic echo of the woman Holly Arnold had once been. The couple's desperate struggles grew weaker as the toys closed in, their laughter echoing through the shop, a chilling cacophony of vengeance and malice. The last thing Emily saw before darkness claimed her was Holly's doll, its face a perfect mask of terror and triumph. The next morning, Carrington's toy shop opened as usual. A new pair of dolls now occupied the shelf beside Holly, their glassy eyes reflecting eternal fear. Mr. Carrington arranged them carefully, stepping back to admire his growing collection. And outside, the Isle of Wight streets remained blissfully unaware of the horrors hidden within the walls of Carrington's. Locals and tourists alike would continue to wander in, drawn by rumors of the mysterious toy shop. But those who lingered too long, those who dared to reach out and touch, they would never return. They would join the silent ranks of the haunted, their spirits bound forever to Carrington's toys, a sinister legacy waiting for the next curious soul to stumble inside. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had a great day.